If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, have you ever had a paranormal experience? Tell me about it. I'll start. I never saw a ghost, but I did rent a haunted house for a year, unexpectedly. It was an old house built in the very early 1800s. The rent was decent, and it was a stone's throw from a bar we always went to. When we moved in, there was a couple renting the first floor. We were on the second. My roommate and I started noticing some strange things going on. Some I can probably explain away, some I cannot. A door that would be open for weeks would slam in your face as you went into the next room. Could be the uneven floors, but you would walk by the same thing day after day, then one day, bam, right in your face. A few items would fly off the mantel, not fall gently off the edge, fall a good few feet off the shelf. This only happened a few times. My roommate's computer would fire up and start loading Rainbow Six in the middle of the night. Didn't see any kind of scheduled task that would do this. His clock radio would also go off at random times in the middle of the night and play the radio. The worst part for me was my roommate worked nights, so I was always by myself. Each night I would go to bed, lay there and get that feeling that someone was standing right in the doorway looking at me. Not an angry feeling, just the sense that someone was definitely there. I would constantly shut my eyes, get such a strong feeling of being watched, open my eyes and look at the doorway and repeat this over and over again. It seemed to us that things picked up whenever something changed in the house. Shortly after moving in, the couple downstairs broke up. Things happened more often while she was moving out. About 6 months after that, the boyfriend's lease was up and he moved out, and a new couple moved in, and the activity picked up again. My wife, girlfriend at that time, simply would not go in the house if I wasn't home. I would often find her sitting on the front steps waiting for me. One night we blew a fuse, yes, old screw-in fuses, and I was home alone, so I had to go down and change it. The basement was just a dirt floor, and as I'm down there I remember thinking to myself that this is right out of every horror movie ever made. To be honest, we weren't ever scared of what was going on. Nothing seemed malicious or evil, just definitely the feeling that we weren't alone. My ghost experience. I was walking down the hallway past the toilet in my father's house. I saw a man in an old-fashioned 1940s or so hat, suit and jacket that you always see in old pictures, standing there apparently peeing. I saw, it was real. There was way too much detail to be anything other than a real person, but when I looked back he was gone. Wow. Ghost. I freaked out for like 2 seconds. I then backtracked up the hallway about 5 feet, walked past again as exactly the same speed, head orientation and eye direction as I could from earlier, and, here is the kicker, I saw it again. But this time I realized it was just a particular accumulation of light and shadow at a very specific angle with just the right lighting conditions to give a very vague outline of a man in a hat and a jacket. My mind did the rest, filling in all the missing details just like it's designed to do. Our brains are fantastic filling in machines because there is way too much information we absorb and we need to filter it, then enhance it to be able to interpret it. I also have an abduction experience that was totally a case of sleep paralysis also. I thought his was just a particularly vivid and scary dream immediately afterwards, but once I heard of the usual symptoms, loud noise, paralysis, fear, it all fell into place. When I was about 12 years old, a ghost woke me up in the middle of the night. I felt his hand on my face. It was heavy, it was real, it scared the hell out of me. I turned the light on. There was no one else in the room. It happened again later that night. This time, I felt very brave. I grabbed hold of the hand before I went to turn the light on. When I couldn't reach the light, I realized that it was my own hand. I'd managed to grab my left hand with my right hand. It must have lost sensation during the night, while I had it above my head on the pillow, and then flopped forward onto my face. Then there was the time where I walked into my room and saw a shadowy hand reach out for me. That one turned out to be the reflection from the light in the mirror. Took a little experimentation to work it out. I also had spiders. Giant, web-spinning spiders. That was a weird one, because it used to happen in the moments between sleeping and waking. Apparently it's perfectly normal that sometimes you might still be dreaming while you're awake and aware. Happens to a lot of people, though not necessarily involving spiders. It felt so real at the time that I had my boyfriend go through the room looking for it before I was prepared to go back to sleep. When I found out it was normal, I stopped worrying about it. I still see them sometimes. I lived in Santa Barbara, California for a while. I moved there to go to school at UCSB, but it didn't end up working out, for a lot of bullshit reasons. While I was there I fell in love, my first time, with a truly amazing girl. We moved in together after dating for 2 months. I moved in with her because her rent was ridiculously cheap for SB. Before I moved in, she told me I don't want to freak you out, but my house is haunted. Being the rational, scientific guy that I was, I said sure, whatever you say. I didn't believe one word of it. In fact, when I tell people this story today, I don't expect them to believe it either. A little background on this house. It was a fairly old shotgun style, with peeling wall paint on the outside and 40-year-old plaster and lath inside. Morning glory vines covered one entire exterior wall and were making their way inside. They grew in through windows and cracks in the walls. One had found its way into a cupboard and wrapped around an old martini glass, lifting it slightly off its base, suspending it in the air. The lease, in one of her old roommate's name, was 5 years expired and the landlord hadn't been there in much longer than that. Someone had built an illegal addition onto the back of the house at some point. Needless to say, I fell in love with the house immediately. The story she told, which she told me had been researched at the library by her and others, goes like this. When the Spanish settlers would execute a Native American, they would hang them from a tree and when they were dead, cut the rope, and bury the body where it fell. The Native Americans called the area they did this, the place where the white oaks grow. Catchy, ain't it? This was my new backyard. It was illegal to dig down more than 6 feet. Yep, an Indian burial ground. One day I was sitting on the floor alone in our room, screwing around on my computer. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my pack of smokes. I had barely put it into my mouth when I felt something bounce off my knee. My lighter, which had been sitting 3 feet away on top of my turntables, was now sitting on the floor next to me. Another time, I was reading on our bed when I heard something underneath the bed. Pretty freaked out, but curious nonetheless, I peered over the edge of the bed and watched an empty wine bottle roll out from underneath, then back and back out again. I was standing at my mixer, playing some records when all of a sudden, I felt something grab the back of my shirt and pull it sharply. The front of my shirt was pressed sharply against my Adam's apple for a brief instant and then the tension released. Heart pounding, adrenaline surging like Niagara Falls, I spun around, fists up instinctively, to find nothing. I put my back against the wall and just tried to relax, when it happened again. Just a quick jerk of the hem of my shirt, but this time there was a plaster wall at my back. A few more things happened, but this post is long enough already. I never felt threatened, but I had my rational and logical mind challenged to a degree that I never thought possible. I don't have any explanation for that house or the things that occurred, and I don't imagine I ever will. I was on the phone talking to my girlfriend, prob 14 at the time, and she was playing with a Ouija board. She was telling me she was communicating with this guy's spirit, who had died in a car crash. Yeah, I said. So I hear this swirring sound over the phone. I inquire and she replies the pointer is going around and around really fast. It usually means the spirit is angry. She asks the spirit why is he mad, and he spells boyfriend. She denies being my boyfriend. Apparently this spirit has a crush on her, which she had discovered during her little talk with him. So I'm here, sitting on my couch randomly flipping through channels. I tell her I don't see why she plays with dumb stuff like that. I hear the swirring again. She asks again why the spirit is mad, and she gets the same response, boyfriend. She tells the spirit again that she's single, which is followed by the spelling lie. She asks how do you know? So she starts reading the letters from the board G, L, O, S, C, O, W. Babe, what does Glasgow mean? I don't know, I reply. I'm sitting here listening over the phone to this. I've happened to stop the channel on Wheel of Fortune. It's the bonus round, and the guy is just starting to reveal the answer. Glasgow. I think I sat there, staring blankly at the screen, wondering if they were watching TV at the same time, to try and explain how she came up with this word. My girlfriend lived out of the city at the time. Her family didn't have cable TV. That night, as I slept in bed, I rolled over and turned looking at my closet. I started to see this bright yellow flashing light, turning on and off. Mind you, my friends and I used to steal these yellow flashing lights from the construction zones near our house, and the only way to turn the lights off was to physically remove the lid from the battery enclosure. I had this thing completely disconnected sitting on my shelf, and it started flashing in the dead of the night. I ended up just putting the covers over my head and falling asleep. Craziest thing to ever happen to me. After my experience, I believe that anyone who has truly encountered a ghost will never want to see one ever again. This submission caught my attention because I happened to be in the same house in the very room where I was startled awake a few years ago by a ghost standing beside my bed as I napped on a sunny afternoon while others were downstairs on the deck enjoying a barbecue. He was in a dark cloak with a hood, his head was bowed, and he appeared to be holding a small book in his hands before him. He has been seen many times since by other visitors, but never again by me. My mother later admitted that a similar figure had appeared in her bedroom, just below this one, within the first month of her living in the house, which she had built, only he held nothing in his hands, though he was holding them out in front of him, and he wore a black tri-cornered hat. His hands are always in front of him and he usually appears to be holding something. But he's also appeared twice as a woman wearing something like a wedding veil over his head and holding flowers. And yes, I've done some research on the history of the land where this house is built. There was a French trading post in the 1700s about 90 miles from here, and you can still see the remnants of an old railroad track with a foundation nearby out in front of this house which existed before the lake was created. I was young, probably around 10, maybe 11 or 12, like I said, my memory isn't too good on it, when this happened. This is going to sound like it came from a Stephen King story, or something, but I promise every word of it is true. Sailor's honor, I'm not a sailor, but trust me anyway. My grandmother was a real estate broker, and when I went to see her I would go with her on jobs. I have developed a love for interesting houses because of this. One of the houses she was selling was rather creepy, in a serene sort of too peaceful sense. A little backstory is necessary. This house was built in the early 1800s. Diagonal to it was a barn featuring its own outhouse. Indoor plumbing was added when it became fashionable. I don't remember much from inside the house, but there is a scene that remains singly vivid in the corridors of my mind. I call them such, because I often get lost on the way to memories like this. A lavish lounge, harboring bookshelves of darkly stained hardwood. A peaceful willow cast odd shadows upon them, and dust drifted visibly across the room as there was a window positioned perfectly such to allow midday sun to stream through it. It is a weird memory to have, but it remains so vivid after these years for some reason. Anyway, now that that little bit of exposition is out of the way, let us get on to the core of the story. It is split into 3 days. Day 1, we arrive and examine the house. This is the day the memory from within occurred. Day 2 is where the story takes a bit of a sinister twist. But a bit more backstory is needed. As this house was built in the early 1800s, infant mortality rates were quite high. The family that occupied the house when it was new were a testament to that, and there were 2 headstones of children on the front lawn. The first being around my age, the second a small child 2 or 3, probably. We arrived at the side door, used the same key that worked the day before, nothing. The door remained locked, shut, barred, whatever you wish to call it. We tried the front door, which we hadn't used the day before, much of the same happened. We were extremely perplexed. The locks on the front door and the side door were the same, and we had used the side door a day earlier perfectly fine. What are the chances that both of them would become stubborn at the same time? We called a locksmith, but we were always away from him, so we resigned ourselves to continue trying while we waited for him. It was around then we began to notice an odd sound from within. Now, the previous occupants had not lived in the house for, as I remember it, a good several months, and we had locked the door, who themselves had no lock mechanisms other than the built-in the knob lock, so there could be no one inside. Yet, we heard pitter-patters on hardwood floor, as if a light person was running barefoot through the halls. The locksmith arrives with the proper key, which doesn't work. Frustrated, and a bit weirded out, we give up and leave. Day 3 arrives, and we return. The keys, both of them, work perfectly. We enter the house, and among the dust that has collected on the ground since our last entrance there exists smears, on the floor, of little, naked feet. As if a small child had been running around barefoot, just the day before. I remember nothing else of that day or any day surrounding it for a bit. I'm Mexican, and my family has a lot of these rituals. My mother, who now passed away, would often be the one leading them. I remember 2, and they both involved infants. There seems to be a belief that an infant can be spooked or scared, meaning that some kind of malevolent spirit has taken presence with the child. Distant relatives and other family friends would often bring their children to my mother, since she seemed to be a matriarch of some sort. It was very strange, since the ritual involved rubbing some kind of oil all over the child, followed by placing a blanket over his head and most of the body, and then calling out his name. This ritual was supposed to drive out the spirit. Another ritual involved the undeveloped cartilage over a baby's skull. I don't remember much of it, but most of the ritual involved shaking a baby upside down in order to pop his skull into place, meaning that the cartilage had sunken in and needed to be popped back out to form correctly. I would always ask why they performed these rituals, what evidence they had for believing the infant was experiencing these conditions, and why these rituals would work. It was pretty much just accepted that this happened. I guess it stemmed from age-old beliefs and superstitions. When I was like 6 or 7, every night I would go to sleep upstairs and my family would stay downstairs to watch TV. Well, every time I would stay awake in my bed in total silence, staring at the hallway, convinced that a ghost or monster was going to kill me. Literally every house creak scared me. Well, one night as I'm staring into the hallway, I hear this heavy, slow breathing. I'm wide awake, so I just stay frozen in fear. Finally, I run down crying to my parents, who of course don't believe me. They just say turn a fan on. To this day, I still sleep with a fan. About 5 years later, I'm in my sister's room downstairs. She goes up to the bathroom and I hear that fucking breathing again. I wake up my dog, but the sound still keeps going. As soon as my sister gets back, it stops. I still can't explain what it was. My boyfriend and I recently moved into an apartment together. We have been experiencing strange things since we moved in, items being stacked while we're out of the house, electronics turning on, things being moved, etc. He was quick to blame it on the dog, or a maintenance man, but I wasn't convinced. Last week he called me sounding extremely shaken up. I travel for work, so I was out of town at the time. The night before, he had been sleeping and there was a loud bang that shook the bed and the closet door. He instantly thinks it's an earthquake and goes to check the rest of the house and notices that nothing else is disturbed, the ceiling fan isn't moving, etc. He goes back to bed and it happens again. 2 nights later, I'm home and sleeping in bed when I feel something pressing against the mattress at the foot of the bed, like someone pushing the bed, and then pressing down onto my feet. This happened for about 3 minutes when I finally woke my boyfriend up and curled up so my feet wouldn't be near the foot of the bed. I had never been more scared in my life. Needless to say, he now agrees that it wasn't the dog, or a maintenance man. When I was very young and afraid of the dark, now and then my sister would let me sleep with her. One morning, when it was starting to get light and she was still sleeping, I saw the door to the bedroom open slightly. Then her dresser drawer, right next to the bed, slid out by itself. After a few seconds it slid back in. Then a few seconds later the door closed. I was pretty freaked out, too afraid to move or do anything. I had forgotten about it for years, until talking with my sister, and she mentioned she saw the same thing that morning. It sent chills down our spines, as we had both eventually written it off as a weird dream. The same house also had a toilet seat that would fall down, making a clattering sound. Checking it out, it clearly was stable in the open position, not teetering on edge. It usually happened when we were down in the basement and heard it happening upstairs. No one ever saw it happen, and the house was always otherwise empty when we experienced it. Some pissed off female ghost, I guess. One time my daughter left a thick but loosely bound career options book at my house, an ancient place. I put it on a table in the corner for next time she was over. The next morning when I came downstairs, it was open on the coffee table. There was no one else in the house. Perhaps the cats pulled a good practical joke. It was open to oil and gas jobs, and I've since taken contracting work in that field. A career counseling ghost. Had some other weird stuff happen here, but nothing that really scares me anymore. You all may think I am crazy. I was living in the Canadian Rockies in the early 00s, working in a resort that was built at the turn of the 20th century. Me and an ex were living in these old army barracks. The mountains were a training area during World War I, methinks, and if anyone is that interested I can do some research, that were transformed into staff housing a long time ago. I'll be honest, we had heard the whole lodge was haunted, which for most people already kills the story. Either way, I digress. So it begins with me picking my ex up from the Edmonton airport and driving 4 hours back to the resort in the Rockies. We arrived sometime in the afternoon and spent it in general laziness. The dining hall opened around 4:30, so I was sitting on the edge of the bed with her standing between my legs just waiting. I heard something to the right of me on the nightstand and turned to see my CD case standing on its round end, wobbling unnaturally back and forth. I look at my ex, she looks at me, we don't really know what to say. I got a little weirded out, but you know I've done a lot of drugs in my day, and I try not to jump to conclusions. So we laugh a bit and shrug it off, head on down to supper. That night we were lying in bed, both of us talking softly but pretty much ready to fall asleep, when our VCR turns itself on, sucks in the tape and starts freaking RW/FW, I couldn't tell which one. We are in a dark room, and I'm on the outside, she just screams turn it off, so I get up in the pitch black and pull the thing out of the wall. I was little freaked out now, as this day was getting creepier by the minute. Laying down again, she just pretty much buries herself in my chest and I just stared into the darkness, listening. About an hour or so passes and I hear something faintly, coming to, I could hear muffled noises all around the room in different places, so many it couldn't have been mice, or squirrels, it was too deliberate and rhythmic. I just held tight and waited for morning. I have had other experiences, but they were alone, and I have done enough acid to know not to trust my senses on their own. But we both remember those incidents, and even though we had an explosive and heartbreaking end almost 7 years later, I know she would still back me up on this one. I consider myself a deep skeptic because as far back as I can remember, I have deeply questioned things. When I was about 4, I remember being very skeptic of Santa and trying to bust my parents. I did. My mother is Catholic, and my father atheist, but they both agreed that they'd let us choose. My brother chose Catholicism, and I, as a younger brother, went along with him. We got baptized, willingly, and did our first communion. Not once did I have full faith in God. I became older and I started coming to terms with the fact that maybe there isn't a God. I ceased to be afraid of the dark. Then I saw my first ghost, and that, to this day, terrifies the daylights out of me. I saw a woman, floating atop my staircase, glowing oddly. My cousin saw the same thing 3 years later, when he moved into the house, without me telling him shit about fuck. That is why I started to accept my occurrence as something real, something that did happen and that I had to come to terms with. Years later, and 2 years ago from present time, I was home alone and I had my second solid ghostly experience. I was grabbing a shirt from my closet when the large, thick wooden door that was off the rail slid about a foot or two towards me, violently. No one was home, no one could have been home. My cat is 7 pounds and was in the living room. I jumped back, looked at the closet, the door, everything while in shock, and then when I realized that this was utterly unexplainable and that it made no sense, I screamed like a woman and ran out. Who the fuck moved that? You do not understand such deep fucking terror. Trying to process the fact that this thing had happened and that I could not question it tore apart my mind for days. Returning home, I considered ending my life for the first, and last time, so far. My atheist side and my ghost-believing side had a strong, deep crash, and it still shakes me to this day. So I've had to come to terms with those things, and after much questioning, I have reached the conclusion that I cannot deny these things, for if I'm a skeptic, I must question everything, including what caused those things. When I was 19, I had traveled out to an abandoned hospital with a few friends. We pulled across the street and shut the car off. It was a clear night with only stars and the moon. A house that was on property floodlight came on and we continued talking until my friend went silent for a few seconds before whispering, "There is someone on top car." I go to laugh it off, but when I looked out the window there was a shadow of a man on my car. I stopped and said, "We are leaving," and hear a loud thud on top of my car. I started the car and drove about 100 feet up before turning around to shine my headlights on the spot we were just parked. There was nobody/nothing in sight. We turned back around and headed for town talking about what it could have been. I had convinced myself that it was a rat or squirrel that had fallen and landed on the roof before running away. About 10 minutes later we had pulled into a gas station. I had gotten out of the vehicle to inspect the top. I saw an imprint of feet and fists on top of my car. As none of my friends I had left the car, we could not explain what had happened. I've had a few, but I'll share the most recent one I've experienced and the ones that have really creeped me out. Total of 3 stories, but if you're interested in hearing more, I have a hashtag on Instagram with all of my experiences. Hashtag InsaneElmoStorytime. The first one, door being blocked by figure. I don't close the door to my room because it gets extremely hot if I do, but I still want some kind of privacy, so I hang up a flag in front of my door. This part here is important. Greater than when I walk into my room, I've adopted this habit of putting my arm out and swinging to the side to fling the flag away before walking in. I'm one of the types of people who stay up really late playing video games or watching TV, and my usual signal that to go to bed is when my brother gets home from work, as he closes at BJ's and gets home around 2:30 p.m. So I get up, turn off my TV and go to the bathroom. As I finish up, I'm heading back towards my room, and I do the fling thing. Except I hit something, and couldn't push the flag to the side. Me being tired and confused, I didn't exactly register what happened, so I kept pushing, and I swear on my life that I couldn't move it any further. When the realization finally hits, I retract my arm and back away, standing there a bit before hesitantly reaching out and moving the flag. There was nothing there that could have blocked me. Second one, figure on top of the stairs. I'm a firm believer of the paranormal, so I tend to make myself a little paranoid and don't tell people about all of the things I experience, so that's why this one got to me, a lot. This was at a different house, BTW. So at this second house there was a set of stairs that lead up to the second floor bathroom, where we had a fun night light that lit it up. Once again I was going to the bathroom and I happened to glance up and see the figure of a tall man standing there. So I booked it to the bathroom, and ever since I don't look up the stairs at night. Fast forward a bit and one of my friends are over, and they go to the bathroom. Once they return I see that they look a little confused and are being quiet, so I ask what's wrong, and I so wish I didn't. I saw a man at the top of the stairs. Third, edge of the bed. This one takes place at a third house. I own a cat who is overweight, and we were in an old wooden house, so it was easy to tell where he was and if he was nearby. So here I am in bed getting tired and falling asleep, and I start to feel pressure around my leg as the blankets start to tighten around it. Me, thinking it was my cat, as he slept with me every night, sat up and reached forward to go let him, and there was nothing. It literally felt like someone has been sitting on the edge of the bed. When I was a security guard, I had this weekend where I had to watch this medical building with a pharmacy in it. Apparently other pharmacies were getting robbed, so I had to watch this building for 3 days while it was closed for a holiday weekend. It was just me for 12 to 16 hours a day, great odd. By the third day I was extremely bored, so when I pulled up to the building for the shift, I yelled by the time I come back outside for a smoke, "If anything is present here, I want those 3 specific lights to be on," as I pointed to 3 specific offices. I went inside and pretty much just watched Netflix until 2 a.m. when I was craving a cigarette. When I went outside, the rest of the 3-floor building was dark except the 3 offices that I pointed at. Instant chills, but it was killing me to know if the lights were a motion sensor or a switch, so I proceeded to go up and check it out. Immediately when I unlocked the door to the office floor, I got an immense sense of someone watching me. I walked down the dark hall to the offices, and noticed that the lights were a manual switch. Right when I noticed that, the feeling of being watched was so strong coming from the end of another dark hallway. I could have sworn at that moment something was just going to be running at me in the darkness. I noped the hell out of there and just mainly patrolled outside the rest of the shift. This story is from roughly 6 to 7 years ago. My then boyfriend, now husband, and I saw some being at the same time but in different states. At the time of this story, my husband was living in California and I was living in Arizona. Being long distance, and with him often working late hours, we often talked on the phone late-ish at night for a few hours. I don't recall how late it was this night, however, I remember that it was late enough that my mom was asleep. I was in bed with the lights off except for a small lamp, and my husband was in his truck in a parking lot because he wanted privacy from his roommate. We were casually talking about who knows what, and suddenly I feel a very creepy figure near my cracked bedroom door. Being the way I am, I compensate for this by talking faster and trying to ignore it. However, my husband has gone eerily silent, so I ask him what's going on. I don't remember his exact words, but it was along the lines of "there is something behind me in the truck." I pause and say there is something in my room. About this time my mom's 2 dogs, who always sleep with her and never come into my room, walk in and sandwich me on my bed. My husband also relaxes because the person on duty had walked by and done their patrol of that area. The being departed. Both of us sort of felt weird, and while we mentioned to each other what it felt like and how it departed at the same time, for us we mostly didn't want to talk about it anymore. It felt like speaking about it was a bad idea. We ended up recalling it a few weeks later in person during the day, and how it was too much of a coincidence to not be something. Fast forward about a year later and we are married and living together. We haven't really had any further encounters. One night, we go down to the apartment's pool. There is a small family there with us and they leave shortly after we arrive. We have a good time, and then around the same time both of us get a feeling, discuss later, that it's time to go. For me, there was a pool chair closer by and I started to get a feeling that I was being watched. Since both of us decided to leave so abruptly, I asked him why he wanted to go. He says it felt like something was there. I asked the chair, and he gets a look that says, "You too?" The last time was a few months after that. One night when we decided to go to bed, he closes the bedroom door, which opens directly to the living room. This was unusual as we usually sleep with it open or cracked. I had a strange feeling that night as if something was on the other side, and he said that's why he closed it. It felt like this was following us, and all the time we barely spoke about it other than to confirm with one another why we were freaked. After another few months we moved out of the country and have never had another encounter. We started speaking more openly about it, and to this day we believe there was absolutely something there all 3 times. It felt borderline bad. I can't say outright malicious, but it certainly didn't feel like it had good intentions. I grew up in the rivers and bayous of Louisiana. My uncle was a 4th-generation commercial fisherman. 4 seen lights in the water late at night. Always in the middle of the river, there's never any sound or disturbance of the water. 4 seen them maybe 5 times in my life. My memory may be a little fuzzy, but I recall white, purple/blue orbs on formations. Sometimes going against the current in a straight line. The going in a straight line thing is what always freaked me out. The current is so strong in the middle. 4 seen a heavy-duty boat go down still tied off to something, and when it got dragged up all the welds were damn near demolished. Metal twisted to hell. You get the point, It's scary powerful, so for something to go against it without effort is terrifying to me. Every time we saw those lights, it didn't matter what we were doing, my uncle would calmly but sternly say, "Let's go home." Here's another weird thing I can't explain. In the back of the bayou there are sometimes old cabins and homes that have long been abandoned. They were built surprisingly tough, as some of them still have a roof, leaky but still standing. Well, there's one old cabin I used to set a net by pretty often. This one day I had been on the water all day and it was getting late, so I was coming back down the bayou pulling nets and heading to the truck. At this point it was raining, commercial fishing is hell folks, and dark, so fuck me right. It's pretty much dark and eerie except that old ass cabin that nature is reclaiming. There's way bright light like a fire was lit inside, but I didn't smell smoke, so it was just weird. So I grabbed my net, pulled it in and went home. A couple of days pass and I'm back out there and decided to check out that old cabin. The door was barely hanging on and the roof was collapsed. The fireplace was covered with plants and so was most of the place. To this day I don't know what the fuck was in there and I don't want to know.